Hello and welcome to All Things Women's Health. I'm your host, Dr. Chris Stroud. I'm an obstetrician gynecologist. I'm a husband. I'm a father. I'm a grandfather. I'm a small business owner. I'm a Catholic. I'm a lot of things. But today on this show, I'm your host as we talk about really all things women's health. And it doesn't matter if it's childbirth to infertility, pregnancy, loss to menopause, homeschooling to personal trainers. If it involves women and their health, it's on our agenda. And today, joining me is a remarkable woman and a mother whose story I know is going to be applicable to you and or someone that you know and care about. Her name is Emily Venderley, and she is joining us today to share a story, a journey really, of infertility, of pregnancy, of surprises, of perseverance, and of victory. I know that you'll enjoy it. So get comfortable as we get to know a lot more about this remarkable young woman's story. We'll be right back with All Things Women's Health. Well, Emily, welcome to All Things Women's Health.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for sharing your story in advance.
Absolutely.
So your story starts sometime back. I didn't meet you right away at the beginning of your pregnancy journey, but why don't we start your story with getting married?
Sure.
And let's walk through from there.
Yeah, absolutely. My husband and I met here in Fort Wayne. He's from Ohio, but we met here while he was in law school. And got married in 2014 and had a great wedding, beautiful wedding at St. Pete's downtown. And we moved to Bloomington shortly after, Bloomington, Indiana, and decided after living there for a while and really enjoying marriage together and enjoying newlywed life. We decided after a couple years that we wanted to start thinking about having kiddos and bringing them into the relationship. And we decided to move home at that point in time. We didn't want to have kids.
Those two decisions often go together.
Yes. We wanted to definitely have grandma and grandpa and aunts and uncles close by. So we moved.
Is it fair to say that you all talked about children before you got married?
Yeah.
And you knew you wanted children.
Absolutely.
And maybe you worked out the timing of your desires. It's a little unfair, I guess, but did you ever entertain the idea that you might struggle to become pregnant?
Never.
Right.
We never did. We had always talked about kids. We both wanted kids. We didn't come from huge families, but we both had siblings, and our siblings have children, and we're very proud aunts and uncles. So yeah, it's always been kind of forethought, and never ever thought that we would struggle with it. So we kind of waited. We wanted to make sure that we were strong as a husband and wife before we became mom and dad. And in hindsight, it added on to our journey, but very happy we did it because, as I'm sure we'll talk about, it's a lot. It's a struggle.
Yeah, the path had some bumps in it.
It did. It certainly did. And Jake was my, he lifted me up, and he was my constant. And if I hadn't have had him, I don't know if we would have made it through. So glad we took that time.
You flipped the switch, so to speak, and decide, okay, now we're going to be pregnant. And then what happened?
We tried, just the usual way, I guess. And then when, we weren't really seeing any results, we had brought it up to my OBGYN and just said, we are trying. And she said, good for you. Good luck. Yeah. And then after we didn't see any results for a couple of months, she recommended some medication, Clomid. And so we tried that for a couple of months, probably about 8 months or so, and still no results. So she then referred us to the next step, which was Midwest Fertility here in Fort Wayne.
Do you remember in those months before you did that first referral, do you remember what those feelings were like, not getting pregnant, each menstrual cycle?
As it went on, we really didn't think about it in the beginning. We just, knew that sometimes it takes a little bit of time. It doesn't always happen the first go around. And I don't know that I was necessarily surprised. I had always had pretty irregular cycles as a teenager and everything. So I kind of knew that it, maybe would be a little bit difficult.
Sure.
And it wouldn't happen right off the bat. But as it went on and on and on, we started to feel a little dejected, a little curious why.
Yeah.
And so, and after my OBGYN kind of recommended something, we knew it was a little more serious than just what she could.
Sort of got real there.
Mm-hmm.
So then you're referred to a pretty traditional fertility practice, and then help listeners understand what that was like.
It was an interesting experience. I felt very clinical almost. It wasn't warm, I wouldn't say. Nobody we talked to, we didn't really get the feel goods from anyone we spoke with. And just kind of felt like we were a chart that we were talked to, but didn't know otherwise that it was supposed to be or could be different.
Sure.
So they did a lot of tests, and automatically essentially recommended IVF.
Wow. So you're still relatively newly married. You're still pretty early in this journey. And all of the sudden, so to speak, someone is recommending IVF. Do you remember what you were thinking then? What was that like?
It was shocking, definitely, to really not have been told anything different and just kind of automatically jumping there. We were surprised, a little nervous, a little disappointed, and our minds kind of started reeling because, IVF is expensive, and we were like, if this is how we have to have a family, that's a surprise for sure. So it was a lot to take in one very brief appointment.
Yeah.
So.
I've had patients through the years often say they felt like they sort of stepped on an IVF conveyor belt and there was just no exit. And they were sort of being wheeled along and it caught them off guard.
Definitely.
So what happened? IVF was recommended. Tell us what happened then.
We talked about it as a couple and just kind of, because we never ruled out adoption, especially after being recommended to the clinic or the specialist. We kind of, once that really became real, we were like, well, what if we can't do this conventionally?
Yeah.
What then? And we never were against adoption, but we definitely wanted to try kind of all of our options before we did decide to go that route.
Yeah.
And I feel like we knew IVF wasn't our only option, but when somebody with the credentials tells you that, automatically you're like, well, maybe this is my only option. So just a lot of discussion and kind of what went next. And I sat in, it was, of course, also during COVID.
Oh.
So that was
everything was more
scary.
complicated.
Yeah, it was scary. The whole world is different. So I was sitting in an appointment, in a virtual appointment, and I was kept waiting for about a half hour with nobody came in to check on me. Nobody said the doctor will be here in a minute. And so I really took that as a sign to try something new.
Yeah.
So we did. And we talked that evening, and my husband said, if you don't feel right about this, then let's not go there. And let's find something different. So we hopped on the internet.
In retrospect, and it's not my intent to bash IVF, but in retrospect, do you remember those conversations? Were you and your husband sort of automatically on the same page? Did you have to evolve to not being interested in IVF? Do you remember what that was like?
I think that we were always kind of on the same path, and I'm not against it. If knowing that the journey that I went on, people have to take extreme measures to have a family.
Yeah.
So if that is your choice, that is fine. That was not our choice.
Yeah.
It just didn't fit in with what we were wanting, and it just never, we just never got the right feeling, I guess, about it. And we were both on the same page about that from the get-go.
Interesting.
So, yeah.
Sure. So you decided there must be something else, and then keep going. What was the something else?
So we got on the internet and kind of searched, and we really didn't do that the first go around because, like I said, my doctor recommended it. So we were like, well, if you're recommending it, it's got to be right. So, and your name popped up. And so we called, and actually we called Credo Family Medicine.
Sure.
And they said, I think the guy you want to talk to is Dr. Stroud. And we said, I think you're probably right. So we called the office, got an appointment and a consult set up. And I believe that takes us to about January of 2021. And that's when we met with you for the first time.
And then, I should probably know the answer to this, but what do you think, what was different about what you perceived from our approach from maybe what some would call the more traditional or more common approach? Because now you've done them both back to back. What do you remember standing out as being different?
I just remember from the beginning, really, even just calling and scheduling an appointment, I just felt better about it. I felt good about it. I felt hopeful about it. And everything, from the website to everybody we spoke to, it just made us feel, one, not alone. So many people go through this, and so many people have these stories.
Sure.
And it's nice to know that you're not alone, because it's a really hard thing to go through. You're not doing essentially what you were put on this earth to do. So it's a hard pill to swallow. But we always felt comforted, and we always felt that things were explained to us very well.
Yeah.
And it seems so simple, kind of finding the answers that we got from your office almost immediately.
It's interesting. I find in talking to people in that situation that you're describing, if you just say you're not pregnant but we'll make you pregnant, there's just this overwhelming desire to want to understand why. Because I think there's this feeling, it's just the way our brains work. If I can know why I'm not pregnant, then I can know there's a chance I'll be pregnant.
Right.
But if I don't know why I'm not, it feels like this enemy that's just too big to take on. And I find through the years, even if I give couples bad news, they will call back later and say, we feel so much better after they got over the shock, because they'll say, now we can at least understand what we're fighting against, as opposed to kind of this unseen, dark force.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's exactly how I felt, even just after it was something almost so simple as a blood workup that you kind of analyzed, all of the things, and we found a couple of, diagnoses, and it was just so much easier to wrap your head around everything, as opposed to, I just feel like we were on a hamster wheel beforehand, where we basically just kept getting the information of, well, you're not pregnant, and we don't know why. Yeah. So
you picked up a couple of medical diagnoses all of a sudden. Do you remember those?
Kind of. I probably won't use all the right words for it, so you can help me out with it. I know I had some hormonal imbalances.
Yeah.
I was not ovulating.
Right.
I had some endometriosis.
And then the first one that I was thinking of was the dreaded PCOS, right?
Yes.
Often discussed, rarely understood, but polycystic ovarian syndrome. And if I remember right, some sort of lights went off and some dots got connected from really all the way back to adolescence.
Oh, yeah.
Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. I kind of alluded to this earlier. I've always had some very irregular cycles from the beginning. Didn't think too much about it. Was never on birth control, so never really knew what a regular cycle was. So I didn't know that they were irregular until I found out what a regular cycle, or not found out, but experienced a regular cycle. So I always struggled with acne. I've always experienced some pain.
Sure.
So when I talked to you about those things and you said, well, that sounds very familiar to me, it all kind of connected the dots, like you said. So,
and there's a look on women's face usually when we're having that talk, and it's the same look on every woman's face. You can see what's happening. She's thinking back to age 12 when all the other girls were fine and she wasn't, or missing sports practice in school because of wacky bleeding or horrific pain. And all of a sudden they realize, wow, there's something going on now, and that something was going on back then.
Right.
And it's sort of one part frustration that I didn't know sooner, and another part elation that I finally know.
Right. There's a diagnosis, and it's always better to have the answers.
Yeah, sure.
You can't go back in time and redo anything, but it's always better to know. And it is kind of a relieving feeling to be like, oh, well, that all makes sense why that was happening.
Yeah. When things are logical, they're always easier to understand.
Yes.
So you probably remember us saying, we're always asking 3 categories of questions, right? Category 1, is there a sperm? I always think 8th grade biology class. Category 2, is there an egg? Is the woman ovulating? And category 3, can those 2 parties get together? So we found a category 2 issue, you might say,
right,
with PCOS and some other hormonal things and some ovulation things. Right. And we got those fixed, and I'm sure you thought, I'll be pregnant any second now.
Yes.
So what happened next?
So we got on that plan and tried. I believe in our initial meeting, we did schedule a surgery just because you were a very popular man, Dr. Stroud. So, and like we kind of said, it had been a long journey up to this point.
Yeah.
So we were kind of ready to get some answers. So we scheduled a surgery just in case. And then
we probably looked out a few months and thought, if we're not pregnant by then, it would be appropriate. Let's get it scheduled now.
Exactly.
That's a common thing. Because the thinking was, if you remember, if category 1 and 2 are normal, or we get them normal, all that's left is category 3. There's nothing else.
Right.
And category 3 is physical structural stuff that keeps sperm and egg from uniting. That's mainly endometriosis.
Right.
And then with the diagnosis of polycystic ovarian syndrome, we know there's a 50 to 70% chance the woman has endometriosis.
Right.
So we often look ahead, just like with you, and say, we're either going to cancel and celebrate because she's pregnant, or we're going to end up there.
Exactly, yeah. And like you said, we knew that the category 2 was an issue, and we worked on that. And then we were not sure that number 3 was an issue, but then come to find out it was.
Yeah. Do you remember at all being, I'd say, maybe frustrated with a sense of, oh no, not one more thing. I thought we fixed everything. Now you're telling me there might be another thing. Do you remember that feeling?
I don't know that I ever was frustrated about that, because I think just having the answers after going so many years without having answers was the most frustrating.
Yeah.
So knowing what was happening felt better to me. Having those answers felt better to me.
Before that first surgery, do you remember ever thinking, this is too much. Let's just forget it. Let's raise puppies. You know?
I mean, I love dogs, so yes. I think we were definitely reaching the end of our rope at that point in time. We were. It's so hard on the woman, but I also think the unspoken thing is that it's very difficult on their husband, or it's difficult on both of them.
Absolutely.
You know, because they can't do anything for you except be there and support you, but they want to do everything. You know, they want to make it happen, and they want. You know, he wanted a kid too, so. It was really hard. It was really taxing. It was emotionally draining. Yeah. And, you know, there were definitely times before that surgery that I was, you know, thinking to myself, I can't do this too much longer. I can't do it anymore.
If you think back to sort of the lowest point, and you didn't give up, but I know there are listeners who will hear this podcast that maybe are ready to give up, or maybe have given up, and now they're rethinking it. What do you think the difference between giving up and not giving up was? Why did you press on? What made that possible?
I think just the hope at the end of it was really what helped us. And I remember our first meeting with you. You said, obviously I can't guarantee anything, but I would suspect that we'll be celebrating by Christmas that you're having a baby. And I know to my husband those words, that's what he really held on to. And I think the same for me. You know, it was just this person who has so much experience and so much knowledge has given us this hope. And that's really what kept us going.
Just one more little push.
Yep, one more little push. I mean, we've done it for so long. We've been at this for, at that point in time, 4 years. What's a couple more months for what could be the greatest gift of our lives, you know? So it was for us, it was a no-brainer. I know for some people, especially when you're in the throes of it, it seems so easy to just throw in the towel and give up, but believe me, it's worth it.
Did you do, as I think most everyone has done, did you notice that everyone around you was pregnant?
Yes, I was going to talk about that. It was so hard for us, not only the obvious, infertility struggles, but we were at the prime age where our friends were having babies, our family was having babies, our dogs were everyone was having a baby except us, and you feel so conflicted because you want to feel so happy for them, and you are happy for them. You know, like I said, I'm a proud aunt, and I love all of my nieces and nephews, but at the same time, when you hear that news, you're so excited and so elated, but it's like a knife through your heart because you're not the one celebrating.
Yeah, I think we hear that every single day.
Yes, and it's difficult, and like you said, it just seems like it's not true, but everybody is having a baby in that moment.
The other thing that I hear from patients always is that suddenly everyone they knew became a PhD in pregnancy problems, and was flooding them with advice.
Yes.
Often well-intended, but often bad.
Yes, yes.
Did you experience some of that as well?
We did, yeah. We have friends and family, and God love them, they wanted to be supportive, and they were just trying to help, but And I feel bad saying it because that it's coming from the truest intentions, but you just want to say, please stop. This is not helpful. But we took it with a grain of salt, and we appreciate all of their support. But
I mean, there's probably a lesson there for any listeners who might find themselves in that other position, where they're encountering a relative or a friend or a coworker that's not pregnant. And I think we should all probably just remember they may be in the throes of a horrible infertility battle. And the slightest wrong look or wrong phrase could be devastating.
It can be. Yeah. It can be. And, I tried to extend grace in those situations because, like I said, it's coming from, a good place in their heart, and they just don't know. They didn't experience it, so they don't know. But it is hard, just be careful or be gentle when you're talking to people, especially if you don't really know what's going on with them. So
I've heard it said what couples need when they're in the midst of a journey like that is empathy and compassion, not advice. So provide lots of the first two and leave the third off.
Exactly. Yes, I would wholeheartedly agree with that.
So we decide there's a date in the future that if you're not pregnant by that date, we're going to look inside. Do you remember what you were thinking when we were describing we're going to look inside? Because that's pretty invasive.
It is, but I don't think that I realized that. I think I just thought I had a procedure prior to coming to FMCC, and it was, I'm not going to say I don't know the name, but they essentially injected dye into the uterus.
An HSG is what we usually call it, sure.
And I remember thinking, oh, this is no big deal. It was outpatient. I drove myself home, and it hurt. It was horrible. And so I remember thinking to myself, if I can do that, I can do anything. Oh. And boy, did I underhype myself for that. But I don't think I realized the severity is probably not the right word, but the complexity of it until afterwards. So I think I was a little laissez-faire about that,
Sure.
But I also think I purposely did that knowing that it was important. It was an important next step in our journey.
So we looked inside and we found some stuff. Try to help listeners understand what you heard and what it was like to hear that.
Sure. I really didn't immediately, I didn't hear a lot because I was still, under. So I remember my husband kind of getting a report and he, talking to me, and he said it looked good. He cleaned a lot of stuff out. These are my husband's words.
Right.
Cleaned a lot of stuff out. I believe he said, I think one of your tubes is blocked. And I was still waking up and I was like, what does that mean? What is this? Like, this is a lot of information to get when you're coming out of anesthesia. So then you came in and talked to us and kind of expounded upon that. And we found a lot of endometriosis, and I do believe one of my tubes was blocked, which you said, not impossible, just makes things a little more difficult. And it was a relief to know that, we kind of got some stuff cleaned out, and we were hopeful, and you were hopeful that it was a success and that it was going to help us.
So do you remember feeling overwhelmed or sort of overtaken, you might say, by another diagnosis and a bad one at that?
I feel like I kind of blocked it out. the latter part of it, I feel like I just told myself, you did this. This was a positive overall.
Yeah.
Take the win. And so, and knowing I had spoken to somebody else who had undergone the same surgery.
Sure.
And they took a couple months, almost a year to conceive.
Yeah.
So I was kind of setting myself up for that, to know that it wasn't going to be immediate.
Yeah.
It was not the cure-all, but it was a step in the right direction.
It's a tough conversation. I mean, the conversation is never going to be husband to wife, how was your day? Oh, my day was great. I found out, I had cancer today. How was your day? That's not a conversation that takes place. And I think endometriosis is equally serious. It's not going to shorten your life, but it's certainly going to affect your life in ways that most people never perceived.
Right.
So it's hard to explain the seriousness of it, the gravity of it, without losing hope, so to speak, and getting pretty dark. But it's a devastating diagnosis.
It is. And I don't think I realized that until kind of after I had gotten the diagnosis. And then all of a sudden it felt like, news stories were popping up about celebrities who were suffering from endometriosis and, how they're speaking out about it. And to me, I had never... I think I'm one of the few women who does have endometriosis and didn't experience, debilitating pain.
Yeah.
So I am lucky in that regard. So I never really knew that it was there.
Yeah. That's actually a great point, in that about 50% of women who have endometriosis do not have pain. And so in the absence of pain, they think it's impossible, I couldn't have it.
Right.
But only about 50%, the other 50%, have the kind of sort of Google pain that you read about. So the absence of pain is not necessarily a green light. The presence of pain is suspicious, but the absence of it doesn't mean. So you fit into that other 50% category.
Right. So I think that also kind of made, once we found out that I had it, and then kind of doing a little more research on it about how hard it can make things, that was kind of an eye-opener.
Yeah.
And so that just made us even more relieved to know that, we'd gone in there and kind of cleaned it out. So it was all good. For the most part, we were very, very hopeful after the surgery. Yes, it came with some not as good news, but I think we just tried, at this point in time especially, we were trying to focus on the positive.
Yeah. So now you have a diagnosis of PCOS, not a casual diagnosis. Now you pick up another diagnosis of endometriosis. Oh, and by the way, 50% of your tubes may be compromised.
Yes.
And so you get over the surgery and you guys take off with hopefully new hope. And what happens next?
We did I feel like after the surgery, we really kicked it into high gear. We had been charting the whole time, and but I feel like after the surgery, our eye was on the prize, and we were like, we're gonna do this. We're doing it. So, which is a good thing. It did definitely keep us going, but it's very hard when it becomes an obsession.
Yeah.
It certainly takes the romance and surprise out of it. The fun out of it.
Yeah, we take what is supposed to be a beautiful, spontaneous event between husband and wife, and we turn it into a to-do list.
Yes. Yes.
And to not speak of that, I think, is to not be honest. Now I wish I had a way to fix that. Right. The only way I know to fix it is to just call it out for what it is.
Exactly.
But you're not alone. I mean, everyone struggles with that. And what I think is funny, so to speak, anecdotally, is, at least in my observation, men struggle with it more than their wives do.
I would agree with that.
Which doesn't exactly fit the stereotype.
Right.
But men struggle. I've had husbands call me and say, what did you tell my wife? I'd like the old one back.
Yeah.
You've turned her into this, sort of fertility machine. But it's a huge problem, especially when it's been a long journey. You can get very task-oriented.
Yes, exactly. And it is. It's like you said, it's a to-do list, and it just seems very, it's just not spontaneous. It's
Right.
not. It's just not almost. It's not fun anymore.
Sure.
And it should be.
Yeah.
And you've resigned yourself to knowing that you're never going to have that moment where you just happen to take a pregnancy test and you just happen to find out you're pregnant. You're never going to have that.
Yeah.
And it's okay. I mean, it's still a wonderful journey, but it's just a bummer.
It's not Hollywood.
Yeah, it is not. It's not a movie.
Yeah, definitely not. So you start trying, and then you get some news a couple of months later.
We do, yeah. It was July, and we were days away from moving into a new house.
Of course.
And my period had been late, and so which really didn't, it was not, alarm bells for me, because like I had said,
You've done that, yeah.
Been there, done that. So, but I was like, you know what, I'm gonna take a test just in case, find out, fully expecting to see another negative.
Yeah.
And it was positive. Yeah. So, told my husband. We were both, I think, in shock, for sure, but absolutely delighted.
Yeah. I mean, I know it's probably impossible to describe, but try to describe for listeners, after all these years now, we're 5 years about in your journey, you finally get a positive test. What was that feeling like?
Surreal. I don't know that I automatically believed it.
Of course.
It took me a long time to actually grasp that I was pregnant. And I really had no symptoms. So that was another thing. And I think that after such a long journey, I was also just preparing myself for more bad news.
Yeah.
So this is a false positive. This is a cheap test and it's wrong. All of these things.
I hear those every day.
Yes. So while we were ecstatic and so happy, I think we were also protecting ourselves to realize that we were waiting for the other shoe to drop.
Yeah.
So, which kind of sounds bad, but just after so much disappointment,
sure,
you kind of have to prepare yourself for
and
that.
Protect your heart.
Yeah.
So, but enough time and enough pregnancy tests are positive that
Yes.
eventually you start to believe it.
Yes.
And you're pregnant. So
Yes.
you cruise through pregnancy. What was that like?
It was great for the most part. I actually, especially in the beginning, I really had no symptoms. And so no negative symptoms, I should say, no nausea or anything. We did have to do injections, progesterone injections.
Yes,
so,
right.
and I think we were not surprised by that just because, of course, we did.
Sure. The hormonal story,
yes,
it just made sense.
Yes. So, other than that, it was a picture-perfect pregnancy, and a healthy little boy. We loved hearing his heartbeat and, doing all the All the
I'm sure
things.
you know plenty of women who have been pregnant. Do you gather in talking to women without a fertility journey that just became pregnant without any forethought? Do you gather they experience pregnancy differently maybe than you and your husband did?
Perhaps. I don't want to say that they take it for granted because I don't think
Sure.
anybody does, but I do think that the entire pregnancy we were so anxious and so scared that something was going to happen.
Sure.
Because why wouldn't it? You
Yeah.
know, based off of everything that has happened up to now, we were just scared and just waiting for it to happen, just
Right.
waiting for a call or waiting for that bad news. So while we enjoyed every moment of it, I think we were both very happy when it was over and we had him here in our arms and he was safe and healthy.
Nice.
So
But that's not the end of your story.
that is not the end of my story.
So you have your son, and you've now joined the Parenthood Club.
Yes.
And some circles under your eyes. And what happens next?
Well, I think it was we had talked and we always knew we wanted more kids. And so after we got past the newborn stage where we didn't sleep, I said, well, might be a little soon, but what do we think about number 2?
Yeah.
And I think my husband was like, are you crazy? I'm not ready for all
He's
that.
not the first to question that.
Yeah. And I said, I don't want to be pregnant tomorrow.
Yeah.
Trust me. But if you'll recall, it took us 5 years. So
Yeah.
we don't have 5 years to wait. I'm not old, but, I'm 32 and my husband's a little older than I am. So the clock was definitely ticking.
Sure.
So, we kind of talked about it and we started very, very casually trying right before our son turned 1.
Yeah.
And that, a couple months went by, nothing really happened. So we decided to call you up again.
Yeah. And that scenario is, by the way, a very common scenario. We did some things, pregnancy happened, some time goes by, now we're ready to be pregnant again. What do we do? Academically, do we go back and start over, or do we start from where we left off? I think that varies probably by fertility practice, but we tend to say, let's start with a recipe that worked, recognizing we might have to modify it because
Right.
it's been a year and a half, maybe longer, so some things may have changed.
Right.
But generally, it's sort of a little bit of retesting, a little bit of rediscovering, making sure nothing's changed, but back to the regimen,
Right.
and assuming that's going to work again. But it's a unique spot to be in because I think maybe you felt this. People think it couldn't happen twice. There's no way I could get that lucky again.
Yeah.
So then what happened after we started working again?
So we tried for, we got back on some medication and got back kind of on our plan,
Yeah.
like you said, and tried a little longer and still we're not seeing any
Yeah.
results. And so we both my husband and I decided, and in talking to you, we kind of thought, well, we're probably going to have to do surgery again.
Yeah.
And we were okay with that. We expected it. I think we both came into it expecting the worst. Everybody we talked to was like, well, you had it once. Maybe
Yeah.
things will just fall into place.
Right.
And so, and while that would be wonderful if that happened, we both kind of knew that's probably not going to happen. So,
Yeah.
so we got surgery on the books, and kept trying, and then miraculously we did find out we were pregnant again. And it was a weird string of events. We had talked to you, and we were actually inducing a cycle. And while I was waiting for that cycle to start, waiting, we were going on vacation. And I thought to myself, we're going, and I had been nauseous for about a week or so. And I was like, we're going on vacation. I should probably test just to make sure, just to be safe. And lo and behold, it came back positive.
Yeah.
And this was actually just a couple weeks ago.
Mm.
So went downstairs and just absolutely shocked. Absolutely shocked. I mean, we were shocked the first time, but there are no words to describe how shocked I was this time. So, and so told my husband, and we both didn't believe it immediately, I don't think. And so I had told him, I said, I am a little worried because we're on this plan to induce a cycle. I don't know what that means.
Yeah.
We're kind of in the middle of it. And he said, well, let's call the office first thing tomorrow. And I said, that's fine. So we did. But before I could do that, I woke up the next morning and experienced what I was almost positive had been a miscarriage that evening. So it was hard. It was hard. It was the highest of highs, finding out we were pregnant. And then in a swing of about 12 hours, kind of experiencing a miscarriage, which is just, it's awful.
Yeah.
As I'm sure a lot of people know and understand. So did some tests, and it was all very, very hurried because, like I said, we were leaving for vacation.
Right.
But wanted to make sure that everything was, okay.
Yeah.
Before we left, and then got some confirmation when we returned. So
Yeah.
yeah.
At least 20% of the women listening have had a loss, probably more. But to the other percentage of people that haven't, I mean, what do you take away from that, experiencing that high and that low so close together like that?
I don't know how to. Everybody's different, everybody handles these things differently. And I think I went through a lot of different phases. Shock to begin with, and then obviously sadness, and some pain, to acceptance. And I just kept telling myself it wasn't meant to be at this time. And so, and a little bit of guilt, because I feel like when we first saw that test, I was like, are we ready? Are we really ready? Because I think we had really set ourselves up for knowing that, we were going to do the surgery. And after that, we had kind of had a timeline in our head.
Sure.
And so this was a surprise. And so I was like, it throws a wrench in my plans and everything. And so then after losing it was, did I bring this upon myself? Was I, all of the thoughts that you have in your head. And the best I can say is feel your feelings, mourn. But I don't. I kept thinking back, a lot of would've, could'ves, should'ves, and it you can't do that because you can't go back in time. So
and you're in the midst of it now, so it's really not very fair of us to be asking you about your feelings, but yet they're real and they're there. I think one of the biggest challenges women that have had, whether it's one loss or 10 losses, is there's this sort of a worldly feeling that says, you're fine, you're young, you'll have surgery, you'll be pregnant again, move on, go back to work. And yet your heart is telling you you lost a child. And the two against each other, I think, is what creates the conflict. Because you should be mourning you lost a child. That, in what world would that not hurt? But it's hard sometimes because people they get mixed messages from us in healthcare, from friends, from coworkers, employers, you name it. It can be so tough to deal with the conflict of emotions there and mixed messaging, I think.
Definitely, yeah. And I feel like, I was all over the board because I feel like I never really got to even accept that I was pregnant before I lost it. But then in retrospect, you were, and it happened. So I think there was a little bit of denial. There was just a lot of emotions, and it's hard because it's not something you really you don't go into the office and say, hey guys, I just had a miscarriage, let's talk about it. So it's a very isolated struggle.
Yeah.
And my husband was so supportive, but even to him, he it wasn't his body, he didn't experience, so it was hard for him to kind of know.
It's pretty abstract. Your husband might be an example, but an exception, but a lot of us husbands struggle sometimes with the abstract because you look the same. Nothing's changed.
Yeah.
It's just another day.
Right.
But yet, at the same time, this horrible thing has happened.
Right.
It's hard to know what to do in that sort of abstract environment there.
It is, yeah. And especially, like I said, the shoulda, couldas were the biggest thing. Like, what if I didn't take a pregnancy test? I wouldn't have known, and this would have just been the period that I was expecting. So,
right.
But, it was just another bump in our journey.
Yeah.
It makes us stronger, and it will make, hopefully, our pregnancy and our baby that much more of a treasure.
Yeah.
So.
Well, that's probably a good segue as we begin to wrap up. Of, looking back on your journey, what are the biggest lessons learned if you're advising, young women on the eve of their journey? What do you think are those biggest lessons that you've taken away from all of this?
Wow, that's a loaded question. Patience is a virtue, as we all know. Be patient, trust your journey, embrace it. While it is very difficult, it's your story, no matter what. So own it and embrace it, and accept help, accept support where you can, and where you feel comfortable, and just give yourself grace. Do things that make you feel good. The day that I experienced a miscarriage, I went and got my nails done, and my husband was like, "Really?" And I was like, I just needed it. So, carve out some time for you. Carve out some time to be sad, but also carve out time to be happy. So, that's what worked for me.
Yeah.
Keep with it, and I guess keep the faith. And we keep saying, what's meant to be will be. And we have gotten so much. We have our beautiful little boy who is perfect. And even if, we don't have another child, we have been blessed with so much. So we try and remember that, and we try and be grateful for that. Just embrace it all. So.
That sounds like sound advice for everyone.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing your journey with us. I hope sometime you can come back on the show and tell us about the next 5 or 6 kids.
Yeah.
And how well that's gone for you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I hope, listeners, I hope you've enjoyed this episode. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as we even have enjoyed sharing it with you. Are there topics that you'd like to know more about? Are there things that you'd like us to cover? You have questions that you'd like us to dedicate an episode to? If so, we'd love to hear from you. You can reach me directly at Dr. Stroud at fertilityandmidwifery.com. You can message me directly, 260-450-8878. I'd love to hear your ideas. Also, I want to say a special thank you to our friends here at Spoke Street Media, without whom this podcast would simply be impossible. You can look at a plethora of amazing content at spokestreet.com, so check them out. So thanks again for listening to All Things Women's Health. I hope you'll like and subscribe. I'll be back soon with another episode. Until then, thanks for joining me. I'm Dr. Chris Stroud.